84% of developers now use or plan to use AI coding tools in their workflows. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst for the AppDev practice, and I'm joined by Jonathan from Moderne. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Paul.
Yeah, great to have you on. You want to introduce yourself and introduce the company?
Absolutely. I'm a developer by background. I'm the current co-founder and CEO at Moderne, doing large-scale application modernization, impact analysis, et cetera. So, deep tech for developers.
Awesome, Jonathan. It's great to have you on because, our audience here is a good percentage of our audience is the practitioners, the developers. They always want to know about the latest and greatest trends. And as we talk about this AppDevANGLE, we really are diving into the biggest shifts that shape the software development industry today. We're seeing that this move from AI that simply generates code to AI that truly understands, governs, and modernizes the entire code base. So it's really changing how organizations are they're looking at and wrestling with accelerating technical debt, multi-repo complexities, but also the rise of agentic AI in their pipelines. So, Jonathan, I really want to kind of go through and explore how these platforms, like Moderne, for example, are redefining what safe, scalable, and intelligent application development really looks like in the environment. So let's just jump right in, Jonathan. I'd love to get your thoughts on, that first topic, right? AI has made huge strides in code generation, but understanding complex multi-repo code bases really does lag behind. It's not mature enough yet, I don't think. So how does, Moderne and how do you tackle the code and understanding the gap? And also, why is this becoming such a critical need for enterprise teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to start with where we were before AI code generation actually arrived on the scene. So I'm thinking of one of the earliest customers we work with has about 500 million lines of source code, proprietary source code under management in our platform. And a number like that's just kind of hard to wrap your mind around, right? So I did this exercise at one point where I thought, what if I just printed that code out in books, just standard size, font, page size and everything, and just stack those books end to end, how long would that bookcase be? Now, intuitively, I would think I'm sitting here in this room. I thought maybe I'd go back to, that window on the other side, something like that, something across the room, maybe to the next room. As it turns out, that bookcase would stretch all the way from Montreal to Miami. And that's just the volume of code they have under management. That's not one of the biggest organizations we work with right now. I think the largest organization we work with has about 80 times that code base. So this was the state of the situation before AI code generation arrived on the scene. Now, do we believe there's going to be more or less? Certainly a lot more. I think of AI code generation as giving you like a lot of free puppies. And at some point, you have to feed those puppies.
Yeah, I mean, that's just crazy to think about the volume of data, right? The volume of code, and this is just expanding, substantially when you look at adding AI in, and we add in how it's being used. In my 2025 research, I kind of highlighted the fact that 51% of production applications are using AI in their workloads, and we finished up that research at the August-September timeframe. So I can only imagine how much more is being used now, right? It's just substantial. But let's talk about blending generative AI and tooling and what this means for Moderne's, really separation of semantic intelligence and deterministic transformation, to improve trust, auditability, also safety at large-scale code change, because this is a big factor. I mean, you mentioned that volume of code, but safety and auditability and trust is a big factor here. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think if we're going to make a change on a large code base, it's really generally productive if we think about making the change horizontally across whole business units rather than trying to make a whole set of changes vertically on one application at a time. Part of the value there, if you think about things, striping things out horizontally and accomplish things one at a time, if you need to move on, you sort of lose momentum on this change right now, that's okay. You can come back and pick it up at a later time. At any rate, suppose I'm going to make a change horizontally across a large code base. If I make that change with a probabilistic system like an LLM, then I have to inspect every change uniquely to ensure that it's correct. I need the human in the loop on every single change. If instead I can have the generative AI or the coding assistant build a deterministic recipe, that recipe becomes a machine that makes this, that's verifiable, and that makes this the same change repeatedly without having to inspect every call site. So that's, I think, what we want is we want to have the generative AI build basically like a cookie cutter that then goes out and stamps out low variability cookies against a lot of different call sites.
Yeah, I like that kind of approach, because when we think about the acceleration of application creation, it's not just happening with the professional developer. It's happening at the lines of businesses. The citizen developers are working, and organizations really do need to take into consideration governance, compliance, and regulation as part of their their rollout. So having a templatized way of doing things really helps. But this also introduces the modernization backlogs and technical debt that it's really accelerating, right? Especially when you look at this rapid generation of AI code. It's even more code, so it's more than what you were talking about. I don't know, maybe extend those books further out. But I think that when we look at this, organizations need to really shift from firefighting to be more proactive in large scale remediation. Would you agree?
I do. I think one of the things that's not obvious is how to provide that automation to teams to act on it in a way. There's the social engineering aspect of this as well. So the most obvious approach would be to issue mass PRs to a whole organization, whatever the system is that originally proposed the change. And what we find pretty regularly is that PRs coming from an external team, a central team, are often received by product engineers as like unwelcome advice coming from an in-law. You're just looking for a reason to reject it. There's just something about somebody from outside your team saying, hey, it looks like you could use a little, lose a little weight right now. You think, hey, there's just a natural resistance that's built into that. Whereas if you find ways of crafting experiences that allow a developer to pull and apply a change to their scope of responsibility, kind of pull-based change, that tends to work a lot better.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But it also gets more complex when you think of, these multi-repo scales, right? I think that's a big factor, because you have different sites, different distributed environments, fragmented around the, ecosystem. What does that mean? And how do you address, multi-repo scale issues?
Absolutely. I think the key first is to build up some sort of data warehouse of the code at rest. And I think right now what's in version control is effectively code as text. That text is a very glossy representation. When I look at code as text, I don't understand what the relationships between their symbols are, the dependency relationships between repositories. It's kind of remarkable when I think about it. Really, the developer tools landscape to this point has been largely single repository. In GitHub, you do commits to a single repository. GitHub issues a single repository, actions single repository, PR single repository. And yet, a particular business application typically consists of many, dozens, hundreds, thousands in some cases of individual repositories. So it's been a bit surprising how how fragmented that tooling ecosystem has been to do multi-repository activity.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, as you see the growth with, I guess in my practice, I focus on past, present, and future, right? How applications are being modernized, how things roll in modernization's a treadmill, right? And it continues to run. You just keep running.
It never ends.
It seems to get faster and faster. Like somebody's turning up the speed and turning up the incline at the same time. So, but yeah, I think that there's, the more and more we start looking at heritage environments and we look at heritage data sets and incorporating that data into these new modern applications. These modern applications are the portfolios are really spanning multiple languages, repositories, and file formats, right? Not just the text that you were talking about, but also different areas where they're kind of coming into a true multi-language, multi-repo, multi-format support. And like that from a practice perspective, it adds a complexity and heterogeneous environments. How would organizations overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah, first of all, I think about what's the format of that data lake. If we're going to try to understand some symbolic relationships between things, we have to have a model of the code that's kind of abstract syntax tree level, and then maybe even one step further beyond that to show the kind of relationships between components at the symbol level. When I first started, I would have assumed that each language had its own, what we call lossless semantic tree, but kind of this syntactic plus semantic structure of code. I would have thought they would have been completely unique for, say, Java and JavaScript and C# and so forth. And what we discovered along the way is that the LST structure inside, say, the C family of languages, which would, I guess, in this case, include all of those languages I mentioned, plus like Python and Ruby, et cetera, are actually largely the same. Very controversial view, I would say, with our language engineering teams over the last few years, that a method invocation in one in Java actually has the same structure as it does in JavaScript. What that's really meant is that a lot of the core recipes and analyses that we've built up for one language, if it's modeled correctly, actually can serve without modification in other languages in the same family. Then you kind of go up a level to program analysis of the sort like data flow, tain flow analysis and such, which are often used in security type remediations. And all the exit points of that analysis we found to be shared inside the C families as well. So really a lot of possible reuse if you build it the right way.
Yeah, so to kind of sum that up a little bit, I think if you look at it in the context of reduce redundancy, you reuse where you can reuse, and then
that's right.
Basically shrink your footprint, right? So shrink it down a little bit. Yeah,
right.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, why not, right? And actually, from a security perspective, you reduce your attack space as well. So
right.
that's a big factor there as well. But I think one of the things we're seeing with the rise of agentic AI across the pipelines, governance, and across the overall SDLC, lifecycle management, it really is kind of taking off, and it's rightfully so. It's kind of the thing to kind of be doing today. If you're not, you're going to be competitively boxed out. So how should organizations really prepare for these AI agents, whether it's MCP servers or agents, and then they're embedded throughout the AppDev workflows? And and how do you look at these emerging governance models and comply at the same time? Because when we think about these new applications that are being developed and these new regulations that are being put in place, like the EU CRA, for example, that's being put in place, and that has to be addressed. Like, these governance models are really going to control the narrative. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I try to take the reductionist view here. First of all, which is to say, suppose an agent or even a human writes 100% perfect code today. And I mean all the best choices of frameworks, third-party services, zero vulnerabilities, absolutely perfect. 6 months from now, that code is no longer perfect. The code didn't change. What changed is the libraries were changing out from under us. The APIs that we're using are changing out from under us. New vulnerabilities are discovered. So, even before AI augmentation of code generation, we were already groaning under hundreds of millions, if not billions of lines of code. I don't actually have to believe that an autonomous agent is ever going to successfully do anything in the SDLC in order to see a need now, as these new governance criteria come out, to be able to manage the code that we have at scale. So that's the sort of reductionist view. Then I think the same mechanic or mechanism that you would use to work in that world is, of course, equally applicable in a world where a portion of that code is being written by humans, a portion of that code is being written by agents.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to think about here, because as organizations are modernizing, they're looking at the new approaches and how they're moving forward. Instituting policies and processes in place is actually very important as part of this kind of evolution occurs. I mean, the code development is no longer just about a technical conversation. It's more about the people, process, and technology, and how it all kind of stacks together. So I think it's becoming, I mean, people have been saying this for years, but it's becoming more and more apparent when we start talking about AI and the impacts of AI across your organization. But Jonathan, this has been really great having you on. I'd love to get your closing thoughts. Where can where can the audience go to learn more? I know we just touched on a couple of things here. People are in various stages of their maturity, right? They're either just getting started or very fully mature. Where would they go to learn more about, what we're talking about here?
Sure, you can absolutely find us at moderne.ai or find me on LinkedIn or Twitter or anywhere else. I think the one thing, business value wise, we didn't talk about really was the application of the same mechanism to shifting or consolidating tech. And a big driver of this right now for a lot of businesses is substantial price increases coming from vendors or third-party services, and they want to shift to something new. So think of that. It's not always about developer productivity. It's not always about security. It's about being able to, have a liquid tech stack that you're able to move from, one tech stack to another as the environment changes around you. So I think that's really helpful to talk to the business about.
Well, you heard it here first. Jonathan, great to have you on. Thanks for your insights. There's a lot to consider, a lot to think about, and the audience has probably some homework to do and maybe even some bedtime reading to do here for sure. Thank you for joining me today. And a big thank you to all of you who tuned in. We really do appreciate you being part of the AppDevANGLE community. But for now, that wraps up this episode. We'll be back next Wednesday with another conversation diving into the tools, trends, and talents shaping the future of application development. So whether you're deploying at the edge, building with AI, or modernizing your cloud stack, we've got you covered. Be sure to follow us on social if you have any thoughts or questions or just want to connect. Until next time, stay curious and stay building.